now to got it. It's being recorded. All right, go, Ed.
Okay, thank you. And thank you all for showing up in a timely manner. And maybe I should thank people at the end too who show up later. So, uh, oops, I gotta get rid of a little sign here. Okay. I thought tonight that I would talk about rivers and paddling. I hope that's okay. Okay. Um, I think it's no secret that I've long been passionate about exploring rivers, longer than most of you think. Uh, there's a little brook just down the hill from me in Silver Spring called Sligo Creek, maybe about 7 or 8 miles long. And when I was about 11 years old, I recruited friends to do a series of, quote, expeditions to explore maybe a mile or two at a time on a Saturday, where Sligo came from and where it went. We walked, we waded, we skipped stones, we floated toy boats. We had a grand old time. And in time, we explored the river, or the creek from end to end. I want to tell you, Magellan, Columbus, Leif Erikson, those dudes had nothing on us, nothing at all. And when I got older and took up paddling, my radius of knowledge slowly expanded to Virginia, West Virginia, Pennsylvania, the Smokies, Florida, the Rocky Mountains, the far northwest of Canada. But you could only go so far because big oceans were in the way. So I want to go to share screen, which always confounds me right here. And oops. Can't. Susan, how do I get rid of my image too? Uh-oh, don't tell me she can't hear me anymore. Let's see. Stop video. Okay, I got rid of that. Here you are, share a screen. But I'm not seeing anything. I'm going to stop share again and try again. I know. Just a minute. Always something.
We can see your screen.
You can see my screen?
Yes.
Well, that's disturbing. But what are you seeing?
We're seeing your desktop right now.
Yeah, we don't want that. Let's see. Okay. Okay. I think we're where I want to be now. Except I can't get rid of the box up at the top. Sorry. I guess we'll have to put up with that. All righty. Back on track. As I was saying, big oceans in the way. Until now, I had always driven to my destination. Flying would prove more of a challenge.
And all we're seeing is a blue screen. Is that what you mean?
If you're seeing a blue screen, that's what I want. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. I don't know how to get rid of the little toolbar at the top, though. So, all righty. Well, as I was saying, flying would prove more of a challenge because, as you know, I fly with a boat in my baggage. The airlines just didn't want to take up valuable space with my river pig. I told them, not a problem. We could work out an alternative method. Just fill my airbags with helium and tow the damn thing. Ugh, they didn't buy it. Well, imagine that. Fortunately, I had an ace up my sleeve. Back in those days, I was closely involved with the whitewater slalom racing community. In 1984, they had a contingent of junior racers headed off to Europe, and they agreed to put me on the roster as a coach, at least in name only. That worked. So I was on the plane with the boat. But the realities abroad of going abroad smacked me hard as soon as we landed in Frankfurt. I didn't know any foreign languages, not a word. I would have to adapt, and quickly. Well, here is my plan. I would still hang with the group for a while, following them to a little city called Augsburg, not too far from Munich. Just that drive down the Autobahn was an eye-opener. Did you know that Germany is one of the world's leading manufacturing powers? Well, it is. And I am firmly convinced that if you want it, there is a factory in Germany that makes it. Well, the reason for going to Augsburg was to attend the whitewater boating pre-World Championships, or if you speak German, it's the Vorweltmeisterschaft in canoe slalom. You see, a World Championship competition is held every odd-numbered year, but to keep everybody on their toes, there is sort of a second-class championship held on even number years. Even this is a big deal, with paddlers converging from dozens of nations. And you could always tell where they're from by the vehicles they arrived in. The Germans in their Volkswagens, the Swedes in their Volvos, the French in their Peugeots, the Americans in their Toyotas. It's so predictable. Oh, some of you are asking, what is slalom? Oh, no problem. It's a test of a paddler's speed and skill at maneuvering their craft in white water. They are expected to run a tortuous path marked by pairs of poles called gates through a stretch of rapids. In Augsburg, the course is a man-made whitewater canal constructed for the 1972 Olympics. The stadium that lines it, I'm told, can seat 30,000 people. And I understand in 1972, it was filled. But today, not so much. And I suspect they were mainly the parents, spouses, and relatives of the competitors. But I was just dazzled to see a facility dedicated solely to our sport. These paddlers make it look easy doing the slalom stuff. But believe me, it is quite intimidating. And you can count on spills and chills among the best. Maybe even the need for repairs. Of course, if you do need anything, on the sidelines, there are vendors to help you out. Just bring your credit card. This sport is so much bigger in Europe than America, and the kids start young, aspiring to someday ascend the stand for their medals. By the way, if you're concerned about safety, be assured that a contingent of frogmen are on guard up and down the course to rescue any swimmer. But this talk is not supposed to be about racing, is it? But exploring rivers. So I took leave of my friends and headed south to the mighty Alps. Near a city called Garmisch is a popular stream called the Loisach. No problem finding boaters there, and one couple named Ellie and Helke befriended me and insisted that I not paddle alone and join them. This was the type of run that I really enjoy. Small, technical, steep, and sometimes blind. But the run was short by my standards, and I went in search of more. In this case, the upper Loisach. It impressed me how much the locals over in Europe appreciate their rivers, not just to paddle, but to fish, to camp, to hike along, and just hang out. Not to mention train future generations of paddlers. I didn't have any information on this stretch, but local boaters said, just follow us, it's easy. So I trusted them. Maybe I should not have. I certainly didn't want to end up in one of those cute little local graveyards. But getting back to land, even that was quite a learning experience. There's so many little twisting roads back in those mountains, barely more than paved paths, where your progress might be challenged by wandering cattle. By the way, wandering but not lost, as they all have bells that give their location away. The houses up there were extraordinarily fancy. Well, so I thought, until I discovered these were plain structures where all those details are just painted artwork. Pretty clever, huh? I quickly learned with my first fill-up of gas that energy is expensive in Europe. But when it comes to heating your home, do you really need to raise the thermostat that high at night when you have huge down comforters to sleep under? There are so many churches over there. I'm sure you would expect that. No two alike. And not to be morbid, I do like to check out the cemeteries too. Around here, they seem to like iron markers. Seems to me that an electrical storm could raise the dead, but maybe not. And of course, there are those amazing mountains just exploding into the sky, some of which were quite provocative. Well, I think most of you would enjoy the alpine paddling scene. It's likely that when you crawl up at the takeout, there will be a riverside bar or cafe at which to retreat, eat, drink, and tell lies. Paddlers matter over in this part of the world, so when you encounter a dam, you may just avoid a portage thanks to a boater chute. As you might expect, these mountains forged some serious whitewater runs, some of them cutting edge for the time. I confess, I gravitated mostly to the easier ones, being alone. Sometimes things in between, though, like the Bregenzerache, located along the Austrian-Swiss border. Another fun but easy run was the Lech, also in Western Austria, where I discovered that the Europeans thought of covering their bridges possibly before we did. Now, of course, doing all these runs, I had to shuttle. I largely hitchhiked, just like here. Now, there is bus service in most of the valleys. Unfortunately, they tend to run only at commuting hours. That was no good. But my favorite shuttle was on the Vorderrhein, one of the two forks that form the Rhine in Switzerland. There you show up at the takeout, a village called Reichenau, go to the train station and buy 2 tickets, one for you and one for your boat, and then all aboard. This is mostly an easy stream with one hard rapid, and you can sneak that and just concentrate on just the spectacular scenery up there. Now, about that village at the takeout, it's typical of Swiss villages and worth the time to explore, as any village is. Swiss villages just don't seem to sprawl. They cram everybody close and surrounded with lots of open space available to all. They do the same in Germany too. So much attention to detail in these old towns, and I took in everything I could. It's just fascinating me. Yet it seems like the locals just take it all for granted, just like here. At times, Switzerland could so perfect, so blemish-free. It seemed like a Walt Disney creation, really. For example, the town of Spitz on a big lake called the Thunersee. But these places have their dark side too. I'm just confiding with you. Like, for example, when I observed the savage ritual of sacrificing small children to hungry swans, it was shocking. But just get that out of your mind. I don't want you to have PTSD. Because the Swiss, the good thing to say about the Swiss, they're ingenious. They like to tie their country together with rail lines. But you must wonder, how do they deal with the steep grades up and down those high mountain passes? Well, they add a cog rail so that a geared wheel can lock in and claw the way forward and up. Pretty cool, huh?
Funicular.
But how you may ask, how do they deal with the challenge of snow and ice that makes for the auto travelers in the high passes? Well, they usually tunnel through the mountain too. But rather than incur this expense of 4 or 6 lane road tunnel, they make a narrow railroad tunnel and ferry you through the mountain. That's save some bucks, or in this case, Swiss francs. So let's get our bearings. I've swung through Lower Germany, then a bit of Austria, then a lot of Switzerland, to end up in a little town called Bourg Saint Maurice, France. Why there? My objective was to catch up with another contingent of the U.S. whitewater team, the Wildwater Group. It's a little hard finding board, so I asked directions to a quaint local lass and was shocked to discover she was part of that group. Now, Borg has been the site of many a slalom and downriver race and championships. The center of activity was at the French Canoe Federation's outpost. For those unfamiliar with wild water racing, the object is just to get from the start to finish as fast as possible, and the participants do their thing in fast and very tippy boats. But these athletes are as dedicated to their sport as any athletes are, hustling from race to race through sometimes the harshest of conditions. So maybe they could be forgiven for retreating to the comfort of a hotel or B&B rather than tent like I do at night. But the problem with that is such accommodations can be expensive. And these athletes are often poor. And it seemed to me that sometimes all they had left over for nourishment was a diet of beer and Nutella. And let me tell you, training under Coach Ben was nothing short of brutal. But all this fascinated me. And as I interviewed these folks one by one, asking them why they put themselves through all this time after time, they would say, Ed, we do this because it's just good, clean, healthy fun. And this concerned me because let me now confess, I had an agenda. I was stalking these racers in hope of finding one to accompany me on the next phase of my journey, the exploration of Yugoslavia. But they were either dropping like flies or running out of money or vacation time. Then, just as I was giving up hope, a volunteer stepped forward. She said her name was Patty. And before she could change her mind or get injured, I loaded her boat on the car and whisked her off, back across the mountains of Switzerland and Austria to the Yugoslav frontier, where we exchanged dollars for dinara, the exchange rate making me a millionaire, and I got down to exploring, or we got down to exploring. We hit the ground running, let me tell you, entering in what is now Slovenia, checking out Triglav National Park, where the highest peak in the old Yugoslavia is. It's a place whose spray from its tumbling waters, and there are many tumbling waters, nurtures what seems like a rainforest. So lush, so welcoming. But that tumbling water halts at a lovely mountain lake, the outlet of which is a river called the Bohinka Sava. The Bohinka Sava flows beneath a 15th century bridge at that outlet by a 15th century church with the 15th century frescoes on the side, carrying water so clear that it almost made me dizzy. That water went downhill for miles of delightful rapids and at least one man-made drop that was pretty good too. As in most European countries, rough camping is officially legal, but we were never challenged when we just pulled over at a pretty spot and set up a tent. This was a good place for travel. So here's the plan. Our goal was to do an extraordinary river in what is now Montenegro and Bosnia called the Tara. Anything else we subsequently accomplished would be icing on the cake. You may have noticed that Patty was paddling her wild water racing boat. So our first item on the agenda was to visit a paddling club in Zagreb and exchange it for a more suitable craft, because we're going to do some self-support canoe camping. Our contact also supplied us with photocopies from a German guidebook, so we were not exploring completely blind. Thanks to the network gained from our racing world, that was so easy. The drive to the south was not. Part of the route was a severely congested two-lane road that connected Istanbul with the rest of Europe. Traffic just crawled, and impatient drivers passed in the most marginal manner. Maybe every 10 or so miles, we would see the aftermath of some grisly crash by the roadside, often very fresh. It was quite scary, quite stressful. Then there was the pollution. You all take for granted here in the US that diesel trucks' exhaust pipes shoot straight up. In Europe, at least back then, they shot straight back, in your face, and they were as dirty as they come. But through all that, when we could take our eye away from the road, there was so much to learn. I learned that in spite of there being a sizable Muslim population in Yugoslavia, a pig's life there was no better than the US. I learned that with all this expensive energy, Yugoslavians wouldn't hesitate to drive homegrown cars like the tiny Zastava. I learned that in the cities, people were crammed together in gleaming high-rise look-alike apartments, a far cry from the single-family dwellings of the countryside. Many of those rural houses were unfinished. My understanding, and I can't verify this, is that taxes are much lower until a house is finished. So they try to never finish the job. Pretty clever, huh? Still, if you accept the lessons of the Three Little Pigs, those unfinished houses are better than living in a straw house, right? Speaking of grass products, it was so nice to see hay stacked in the traditional manner over there. Well, getting back to the Tara, it is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and at about 4,000 feet, Europe's deepest canyon. But before I take you there, let's talk about the shuttle. So shut your eyes and listen. No, strike that. You may fall asleep. Stare up at the clear blue sky and let your imagination go. Okay, here it goes. First, before dawn, I left Patty by the roadside alone with boats and gear and made the tortuous 4-hour drive down to the takeout town of Foča. The plan was to get back by bus. Absolutely nobody in Foča spoke English. I found my way to the bus station, could not figure out how to buy a ticket or which bus was mine, but somehow made my needs known enough that locals pushed me into a bus just as about to leave. But wait, I protested. I don't have a ticket. Didn't matter. I was stuck. As I went for a seat, the driver glared at me, and to his right was a frightening fellow, tufts of hair welling from the cleavage in his unbuttoned shirt, arms like an ape, and he glared at me too. I quickly avoided eye contact. Then as the bus rolled out of town, the town square, Ape Man stood up, hands on hips, and surveyed the population as a raptor surveys the mice scurrying below. Now, I learned Ape Man was the conductor and the potential bouncer, too. One by one, he marched up the aisle, checking out each passenger's ticket, and then he reached me. I was totally freaked out. I gathered every bill and coin on my person and held it out to him with trembling hand, hoping he would not harm me. To my surprise, he just squinted and gingerly extracted a bill and a few coins, the equivalent of $1.40, and moved on to the next person. Whew, that was a relief. Now the bus climbed through the hills into the mountains on what became a one-lane dirt road. One lane, so I thought, until buses and trucks approached from the other direction. So the drivers would pull in their mirrors and actually squeeze by with hardly an inch to spare. Note that this road had no guardrails, and our outside tires were often literally on the edge. I did not expect to see Patty again. But we made it to a small town in the mountains where we pulled into the town square, which was just filled with people waiting for a bus, apparently our bus. What I just could not understand was that as the bus door opened and people started to try to come aboard, the ape man repelled them. It was like a game of King of the Mountain. There was shouting and probably cursing and then chanting. And as the throngs enveloped the bus, it started rocking. I wondered, was this the start of the revolution? Apparently not. Ape Man eventually stood aside and the riders poured in, and we were soon like sardines in the hot, unair-conditioned bus and back on the winding roads. Ugh, I didn't feel too good. Relief came when we reached Titograd, the capital of Montenegro. Again, I floundered around the bus terminal, and again, helpful locals guided me to the right bus. This one was mostly empty, so I sat on a window seat, transfixed on the spectacular river flowing far below. The bus stopped for a single passenger part way. Why, with all the empty seats, This character decided to sit by me, I will never know. He wasn't there for long before he elbowed me in the ribs, pointed out to the river, and said, Moracha. I shook my head and said, yeah, Reka Moracha, and then ignored him. But only a few moments passed, and he elbowed me again, Moracha. And the cycle repeated itself again and again until he got off several miles up the road. Thank goodness. I don't think my ribs could take any more. So it was, our adventure started. It was a descent that most of you would delight in until things got serious, and the water thrashed through an unrunnable gorge. The guidebook called it Class 6. We did not question the guidebook and took off on a long portage through the forest, not knowing where it should end. It went that way until I thought I heard human voices from below. Upon investigating, I found a bunch of rafters down at the river. They spoke no English, though it was never clear whether they had run the gorge or were just finishing the portage. But I decided to take a chance and have us return to the river. Fortunately, that worked out well. Well, about that swinging bridge, as we approached, out of the wilds, believe I kid you not, came a beautiful young woman, long black skirt, white blouse, hair done up elegantly, slowly walking across. About midpoint, she paused, turned and looked down at me, made eye contact, and smiled a knowing smile on par with that of the Mona Lisa. She then turned, moved on, and dissolved in the wilds. Really? Where was I? Oh, yeah. Paddling the Tara. Yes. Yes, it's best to keep our full attention on the river because it really rocked. It was an exciting first day. And fortunately, after all that excitement, there were welcoming beaches and bars suitable for camping. And it was that way the rest of the river. The next day offered us similar thrills. So much fun. And another surprise, this time in the form of a man and a boy. Like the mystical woman appearing out of the wilds. He didn't speak much English, but made it clear that he was a park ranger and he needed to see our permit, which we did not have. You see, much of the canyon is protected in Dormitor National Park. Fortunately, we were able to pay for a permit on the spot and resume the trip legally. What a relief. The clarity of this river was astounding, and it had to get really deep not to be able to see the bottom. And where it was in those deep pools, the river assumed an enchanting turquoise color. Certainly the locals had no problem drinking from it, and I think we did too. I think we did the same. One peculiarity of the Tara is that there are no side streams, but plenty of side flow, all from springs. One such spring gushed from a cliff and doubled our flow. Another surprise was rounding a bend and seeing an outrageous high bridge. I believe it was just to serve it, at least in those days, a dirt road. Anything is possible with central planning. While the canyon was wild, we were repeatedly reminded that it was not a wilderness. People lived down there. When we made camp, not that far below that bridge, I took off up a path that turned out to lead to a remote farm. I yelled hello. It seemed deserted, but as I walked by the window of the house, a hand reached out and grabbed my arm. A chair was also thrust out, and I was motioned to sit. Of course, the occupants spoke no English, but they know what good hosts do for visitors and quickly put a glass of Slivovitz in my hand. For those of you who do not know, Slivovitz is a fiery plum brandy. It is so potent that if Yugoslavia had ever started a space program, that would have been their rocket fuel. So we hung out for what to me seemed like an affinity, exchanging smiles, saying things we knew the other did not understand. And eventually I somehow managed to excuse myself. Good timing, as when I returned to camp, dinner was ready. And we look forward to a quiet evening watching the river roll by and dreaming about what surprises tomorrow would hold. But that could wait, as our new neighbors came down to visit us. And they invited us up for socializing. How could we refuse? They showed us around the farm and introduced us to their livestock. Now, if I understood it right, if I understood it correctly, the reason for the spiked muzzle was to discourage nursing. You see, the calf goes for the next meal and uncomfortably pokes mom, thereby weaning it from that phase of its life. Any nursing moms listening to this talk? So again, lacking an image, may I get you to please look up in the sky again while I spew out maybe 1,000 more words. They invited us into their house, a 5,000 square foot mansion. It was not. In fact, as far as I could tell, it was just one room. There was a bed, a table, a little stove, and by the open window, a bench where we were motioned to sit. Above the window was a picture of Jesus. At a more prominent point, there was a photo of Marshal Tito, the dictator. Draw your own conclusions. After more smiles, intermittent chatter in our respective languages, out came the hospitality. There was some homemade bread, delicious. Homemade stinky cheese, ugh. And you guessed it, out came the nasty Schlivovitz. Actually, clear 100 octane stuff was for me, and a milder purple grade for Patty, as women are recognized as the weaker sex. More about this later. What torment. The bread and the cheese made me thirsty, but I needed water, not burning alcohol to slake it. Meanwhile, Patty seemed to be getting by okay. Well, we eventually called it an evening, and as we wandered, in my case staggered, back to the camp, I remarked on how well she held her liquor. Well, looks can deceive. Apparently, at the moment she saw them looking away, she tossed her drink over her shoulder, out that open window, repeatedly. Crafty woman, Patty. So on to the next day, down our ever-surging path. It was time to focus on the natural again, like the pretty wildflowers. I wish there were more of them. It was a pretty shady place because the place was mainly a magnificent old-growth beech forest that seemed as if they were never touched by axe or saw. Sadly, we did little exploration away from the river because it was just so easy to get lost in that jungle. We had a few other interactions with humans, like coming across a bunch of guys from Belgrade on a week-long raft trip, living the simple life where provisions consisted of sacks of flowers, a side of beef, and enough Schlivovitz to quench an army. Of course, they insisted on sharing the latter with us. Patty asked them why they did not bring along their wives and kids. The reply, very dangerous. Right. This was the boys' night out, clearly. By the way, those were not the only rafters we encountered. There's a small commercial industry there too, using traditional log rafts. That wonderful canyon just kept getting deeper and deeper, and the flow increasing too, thanks to more numerous voluminous springs, or just trickles sometimes. Yes, many. I guess because we were so sweet, we tended to really attract butterflies. And because we attracted butterflies, we attracted fierce competitors. I want to note that you may think you've seen toads, but you have not seen toads until you have seen toads of the Balkan Peninsula. These things are the size of softballs. They're huge. One more reason to shake your boat out every morning before getting in. Patty found that out the hard way. This was the kind of trip that you just wish would never end. But it's less than 100 miles long, and one method of stretching it out was to always take a midday nap. But sadly, the end did come, and for a change, we decided to go hiking. So we doubled back to the south, almost to our Tara put-in, to explore the wonders of Biogradska National Park. It centers on a beautiful mountain lake where we could have paddled, but did not. But others did take to those waters because it's a good family-friendly activity. The surrounding mountains support a lush forest. Lots of big trees, big undergrowth. We enjoy seeing it all close up, following a path, really a road, up, 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 until we passed above the tree line into a wonderful alpine world where one could see for scores of miles, even out to Albania. It too was one big flower garden. But it's time to return to paddling, right? Remember that amazing river and gorge on the Tara shuttle? You know, the Maracha. We just had to check it out. Though the highway is high above, we actually found an easy place to get to the river and launched. Soon enough, the walls closed in and there was no turning back. The place seemed pristine with this ultra clear water, except for some wrecked cars, which always corresponded to breaks in the guardrail hundreds of feet above. This apparently stressed Patty out a bit. Now, there were 3 exceptionally challenging spots in the run, particularly the first. So I got out first and scouted from a big riverside boulder. I didn't see a line, and there was no portage, sheer walls. And you may not realize in this age of plastic, but we didn't have a place to launch. You know, otter slides just weren't the thing back in those days in glass boats. So I came up with this brilliant idea. I said, one of us should swim down to that big rock downstream, and the other would line the boat down to that person. I volunteered Patty to take the initial plunge. And to my relief, she said, okay. The procedure was not pretty, and we almost wrecked Patty's boat on a pin. But in the end, the only lasting harm was that our lunch got wet. What a bummer. But focusing on the positive, there could be just no more beautiful place to be paddling. Most of the rapids were just fun, and the remaining 2 tough spots had much less drama involved. It was a run that ended all too soon. Well, let's get oriented again. We done the Tara and the Maracha, and were satiated enough to take a few days off from paddling and visit the famed Dalmatian coast. Well known and deluged by tourists today, back then this was a secret known mostly to German tourists. We hit tidewater at a place called Kotor Bay. This place might seem like paradise to many, but for one little flaw, it sits in a seismically active zone. And in 1979, just 5 years before we were there, a nearly 7.0 earthquake ravaged the old town. They were still recovering when we visited. But so much was still intact, luckily. A gorgeous place, and a tourist-oriented industry had returned. So we moved up the coast to Dubrovnik, Queen of the Adriatic. Again, this UNESCO World Heritage Site was little known back in those days. There were no cruise ships disgorging frantic tourists, no mobs. It was a downright sleepy place, as evidenced by the fact that just a few blocks from the old town, we were able to find a B&B for $8, a bargain even in 1984 currency. Dubrovnik is a port town, originally founded as a Venetian trading center. As was typical for that era, a very hazardous time, it was protected by a stout wall, and that's still intact. It seemed a place where time stood still. A living museum. But this is a real city with real occupants living their lives as normal. It was fun to observe them too. And of course, there was the wonderful Adriatic Sea, a good place to go fish, to go for a refreshing swim in crystal clear water that allow you along the edge to peer down at the various life forms that populated the tide pools. But remember, places like this are not always so serene and must be respected by boaters, whether it be a kayak or a merchant ship. And last but not least, it's a good place if you're a teenager to go hide from those pesky, annoying adults and experiment with a new hairdo. From Dubrovnik, we headed up the beautiful coast, stopping one time to join a parade. That was fun. We briefly diverted from the coast to check out ancient Mostar, with its even more ancient Turkish bridge, unfortunately destroyed in the Bosnian War. I had not realized until then that there was such an Islamic side of Europe. They just didn't teach that in school when I was growing up. Now, a visit to the Dalmatian coast is worthy of a full vacation, but we came to explore rivers. So after a final sunset over the water, we headed inland to an amazing Croatian river called the Korana. As I shall elaborate later, it drains a land of falling water. Such a great start, gushing on downstream until we realized we really didn't have that much water in this very ledgy river. By the way, if you run the Korana, mixed with its wild beauty are numerous similarly constructed buildings along the bank. Turns out they're mills. Those crafty Croatians don't miss an opportunity to explore that wonderful gradient for power. And what gradient? More and more as the creek steepened. And as for that dearth of water, no problem. All those rocks are coated with a thick, resilient layer of moss, so we might have never put a scratch in our boats. And that gradient continued, steeper and steeper, now in a seemingly endless series of steep ledges, often horseshoe-shaped, up to maybe 6 feet high. We could just not be having more fun. Patty says I was literally frothing at the mouth in excitement, but you know Patty, she tends to exaggerate. And we were so lucky to have good equipment to do this, not so of all the locals. I told you this was the land of falling waters, and nowhere is this more evident than in the headwaters of the Korana, a place in a national park called Plitvice Lakes. Yes, I think there are about 16 lakes there, but it seemed to us much more falling water. And that's more our style anyway. And you can enjoy the falling water and the flat water too by a wonderful series of hiking trails. And on this biggest lake, if you're getting tired, you can take the electric boat across. This is limestone country, as you probably have guessed. And if you look around, you'll inevitably find caves, of course. But oh, that falling water. Just could not get enough of it. Well, we're not doing this touristing on super highways, certainly not back then. Meandering around those back roads could be so rewarding, especially when you happen upon market day. Remember, this is not a place where tourists went. We were the only outsiders. Everything you need was there. Textiles, fine produce, and everything else. I mean, everything. And after you've gone on your shopping spree, you know, there's no plastic bags back then. Just grab a basket and take it home. Guess who gets to carry the load? Yep, the weaker sex. Edging into Bosnia, we caught a lovely run on something called the River Una with this unusual dam. But we got past that quickly and enjoyed its miles of moving water, all set in a deep canyon. Lonely as the landscape looks, there was plenty of population hidden back there, as evidenced by all the pods of kids that congregated along shore, enjoying their summer vacation. Interesting point. When we would see these groups of kids, when they see us pass by, they would yell out, "Guten Tag, Guten Tag," assuming that we were Germans, a reasonable assumption, as most tourists in Yugoslavia were back then. We insisted, though, on setting the record straight and would reply, "Nay, nay, Amerikanski," to which they would inevitably reply, "Ah, Chicago." Apparently, even then, there was a sizable diaspora in Chicago. So to orient you once again, we don't want you getting lost. We'd done a big circuit, but time was running out, and we had to return Patty's boat to the club in Zagreb. There was just one more river I felt I just had to run, the Socha, up in the northwest corner in what's now Slovenia. Patty was okay with that. She'll run shuttle. Now, this is a well-known paddling destination. And when we arrived, to no surprise, we found a group of Austrian paddlers who were glad to accept my company. Now, I assumed they would show me the lines, but once we launched, they said they would follow me. This was not what I was expecting, and trust me to say, it was exciting, especially since the takeout was hard to recognize. And if you miss it, you flush into class 5 or greater challenges. They asked about my companion, and when they learned that she was landbound only for lack of a suitable boat, they proposed to do a second run that day on a tributary and fix her up with a spare kayak. She could not be more delighted. So we headed up into the mountains forming the Italian border to launch into a stream called the Karutanca. A steep hike down a trail gets you to a crystal clear stream that looked pretty harmless. The path seemed reasonable until there was a horizon line and spray coming up. A fellow on the bank, fellow paddler, pointed to where I should go, which was over this steep drop, where I flipped. And when I rolled, I found myself in a narrow chasm. But things soon enough opened up, and the rest of the run was just one big, long, continuous, delightful flush, ending at the confluence with the Socha, where there was a special campground for paddlers. So as you can see, I covered a lot of ground. So sad to go home, back to Frankfurt. Patty didn't go home. She was a school teacher with the summer off, so she stayed on the continent and spent the following weeks biking alone around Italy. Well, I have to say, I was quite pleased with myself, having pulled this thing off, having pushed the bounds of my comfort limit, having seen rivers that my low-life friends could never even dream of. I was getting a swelled head, to say the least, and clearly needed a reality check. Fortunately, one of my low-life friends saw this coming, and when I returned home and rummaged through the pile of mail, I found this envelope with her return address, opened it, and found just a little New Yorker cartoon, slightly modified. And it said, if you can't read very well, it said, "I'm a frog, you're a frog, hell, we're all frogs." Except, of course, for Prince Charming over there. He just came back from Europe and thinks he's royalty now. Well, that did the trick. I said it all. It brought me back to earth. And to this day, I consider myself so lucky that you all still let me hang out with you all. Not to mention, spend all this time listening to this ridiculous trip report. So I thank you again, and thank you 3 times, and have nothing more to say. So I will stop the share and show that I'm still here. I think, yeah, I'm still here.
That was great, Ed.
Oh, thank you. Do people have questions though that I probably can't answer them?
Have you been back to former Yugoslavia since then?
Yeah, a couple of times. The most recent was after the Bosnia War. It was kind of sad, but I still enjoyed it.
That bridge was rebuilt, the one that was destroyed.
The Mostar Bridge.
Mostar Bridge, it's been rebuilt.
Yeah, it was rebuilt, but it's not the real thing, not quite the same. Oh, somebody asked, what months were you there for? I think it was late June, July. I should have checked that out before I talked. Yeah, that was a good year. Pretty good water in Europe. Sure. Ah, I see some more stuff in the chat. Maybe I can, let's see. You're chatting as a guest. Got it. Okay. We can hear you. That's good. Some of those rivers look pretty rocky. How did your boats do? Yeah, this was back in the age of glass boats for sure. They did okay. That Brazilian moss helped a lot. Where is Patty now? I knew someone had asked that. I'm not totally sure. She married one of those other wild water paddlers, and last I heard, she lives in Colorado Springs. Every time I've been out there, I've been so focused on running rivers, as I tend to be, that I never have dropped in for a say hello. Maybe next time.
Ed, did you carry your camping gear in the kayak in your C1?
Yes, on the Taro we did. Yeah, that was a 4-day trip, I believe. How did you need to get visas approved? How hard was crossing the borders back then? Yeah, we're so spoiled now with the European Union. You just drive across like you're going to Pennsylvania. But back then, you slowed down. I got in trouble one time for going before the guard told me to go, but I don't remember any particular trauma. What boat were you paddling? From Kit Farwell, not the one you bought. couple of generations before. I used to go through boats every couple of years. How did you do food? That was interesting. Okay, for the river, for the camping, we went to the supermarket and looked at the pictures on the labels because we had no idea what we were buying a lot of times, and then put together whatever we could. It was not gourmet eating. As for the restaurants, oh, brother, this was the classic communist country back then. You go into a restaurant and you look at a menu that was as good as a menu in a New Jersey diner, and you'd say, I want this. And they would say, oh, we're out of that. And I want that. Oh, we're out of that. And it always boiled down to about 2 things, usually mixed grill. So you better not be a vegetarian over there. That didn't work very well.
Ed, this is Piotr. Ed, you reminded me Yugoslavia from 74, 75.
Ooh.
For Yugoslavia at the time, for us from Poland, that was already West.
That's right. That was the Iron Curtain.
That was, well, as you remember, politically, Tito was independent of the rest of the Soviet and Stalin and so on. So there was semi-freedom, as we called, and definitely for us from Poland was tough to get to Yugoslavia, a lot less difficult than to western part of Europe. But you reminded me all those rivers, Sava, Kupa, Tara, and for us that was a training place to kayak, to use fiberglass kayaks, as you said. They were almost similar to yours, the same even colors, and all those scenery, beautiful presentation you made. I am back in Yugoslavia on those rivers with you, and thank you very much for showing your previous years and exploration at the time, definitely different than now. Thank you very much again for doing this.
Oh, you're so welcome. By the way, the gentleman who was just talking, Piotr, he's a celebrity. He was the star of a show we did last year where he was one of a member of Polish kayakers that came over and pioneered streams in South America. Totally seat of the pants, doing glass boats like us. Just so in fact, he was kind enough to invite me on one of those expeditions, and at that time the Iron Curtain had fallen, and I went and explored Czechoslovakia instead. He must still think I'm crazy.
Now you were never crazy. You just utilized what you could, and that was great. At that time, for Americans to go there was not easy. and that was a challenge, definitely for you.
Well, it was great. I've enjoyed every moment. So, well, I see another comment here from Joe Cholka. And I also paddled in Yugoslavia, mainly northern sections in 1984. Shoot, why didn't we run into each other? I was with the Berlin Kayak Club. It rained almost every day and the rivers were wild. Don't remember the names of the rivers, but some of the crazy events that transpired. Oh, that's quite a coincidence. You weren't one of those people with the Austrians. Let's see. No more questions? Golly. Well, I must have told you everything, true or not. But this started me on a long career of paddling around overseas, especially Europe. I just love the place. Are you going? Lynn said, "Are you going to do it again?" I don't know. As the people that surround me know this story, but for those of you who don't, back in the first year of the pandemic, right before it started, I was lined up to buy my tickets for my next trip to Europe, which is always fly with Lufthansa, who would carry my boat. And Lufthansa changed its baggage rules. Luckily, I caught that before I bought the ticket. So that was the end of an era. So if I go over there again, it's going to be with a pack raft, meaning I have to learn to paddle on both sides. This could be traumatic. So.
Ed, let's go and do Tara again with plastic boats now. Will be probably a little bit easier.
Certainly that portage will be easy if I have a pack raft.
Sure.
Ed, have you ever considered doing Newfoundland? I've saw lots of really interesting rivers there. Didn't see anybody paddling on them. Not, it seems like you have the place to yourself. But I don't know whether they're difficult to get to, but do you know anything about that?
Kathy, when did you join? Kathy, when did you join CCA?
When did I join CCA? Oh my gosh, I don't know. About 20 years ago.
Well, you joined too late, because maybe more than 20 years ago, we had a show by Andy Bridge of running rivers in Newfoundland.
Oh, wow.
And let me tell you, they were beyond my ability.
Well, I was wondering about that. I didn't see a lot of white water, but again, it might be just near where I was. What made them difficult? Was it the white water?
Well, say that again. What made it difficult?
Yeah, was it a lot of white water or?
Oh yes, they're steep. They just drop off the plateau into the Gulf of St. Lawrence.
Oh.
Yeah. Just amazing thing is Andy Bridge was doing in a glass boat too.
Oh.
So let's see. I have here Lynn Cherry had a question. It's not written down. Lynn, do you want to unmute? Well, if you can get a chance in another moment. I have a comment here. I backpacked around Europe, starting in Russia, and recall those different levels of communism. Apparently, the way to get out of the Iron Curtain was to get to Yugoslavia and escape from there. Yes, I heard Chicago, Al Capone, bang, bang. No paddling in my case, but camping in the country. Yes, great trip report. The diversions from the water are always entertaining coming from you. Thank you. Let's see, more comments. How did you photograph those long shots looking down on the river and in the river? This was time before the GoPros. I think really the main long shot was that one looking straight down on the rapid on the Maracha. That was from the highway, high above, where the unfortunate cars had broken through the guardrail and landed in the river.
How about the ones on the river?
Yeah, so Lynn, you had a question?
Yeah, how about the ones on the river when you were in the river? Because it looked like you had been doing it with a GoPro.
I'm sorry, I'm barely hearing you.
Oh. I wondered how you got the photos that were in the river, because it looked as if you would have gotten them with a GoPro, but there were no GoPros then.
No, no, man. You know, I'm a dinosaur even now, much less then. I just would take the camera out and before I got tipped over, take a picture.
Amazing. Beautiful photographs.
Thank you. They were actually nicer in the past. I shot two types of film, Fuji and I think Agfa, and the Agfa faded on me, unfortunately. And I don't remember what kind of camera I had. I don't even know what kind of camera I have now.
Yeah. You know, I really appreciated your comments about how this is what it looked like now before the tour, before all the cruise boats. So this is what it looked like then before all the tours. So this is because so many of us probably have been at these places that's so pristine and gorgeous, and then we go back and it's just not the same place. So it's nice. It was really nice seeing those in from ancient history.
It definitely some of these places like Venice and Dubrovnik and I mean they're swamped now. Oh, I see here was lack of photos in folks' houses due to privacy. Yeah, absolutely. Is how do I not awkwardly take a picture? So you just had to sit there and stare at the blue and hopefully nobody fell asleep. Keep thinking of. If you don't, we'll conclude the show. What kind of cat? Yep. Well,
All right.
Susan.
Thanks a lot, Ed.
No, you're right.
Thank you, Ed. It was a great show.
Thanks, Ed.
Oh, thank you. It's
Thank you.
great technical support.
Thank you, Ed.
Thanks, Ed.
I agree with everyone. It was very interesting, and thank you for letting me know about the show, Ed.
Oh, thank you.
Be in
Thank you.
touch. Thank you very much.
I'll try to come up with something else again.
Have a good night.
Good night, all.
Okay,
Take care.
take care.